Welcome to the channel. In this video we are going to be taking a look at the 0.8.52 update for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. This update was released into the beta test branch in Steam in the end of September 2021 if you're watching this in the future, and the intended release date for this update is sometime in October. Now, the two main features of this update are the major revamp of the graphical interface and the activation of the loyalty mechanic, which is going to have a fairly significant effect on the game. There's also a few other changes that we'll talk about as we go forward. Now, while the primary focus of this video is going to be talking about the new features in the update, I do also have a secondary objective, is the fact that what I want to do is look at the update in the context of an ongoing series. For that reason, when I'll be demonstrating the features, I'm going to tend to use my 7 Crosses series as a template. Now, if any one of you who follow that series, I want to emphasize that this doesn't mean that I'm going to be using the new update going forward. As soon as this video is finished, I'm going to revert back to the stable branch and play forward until such time as the update drops. The reason for doing that is simply the fact because this update is in the test branch, it will be subject to changes. In fact, I know some changes have already occurred since the initial release. Now, before we get into going on to the game map, I just want to show you something here which to do with starting a new game, because I was curious to see whether loyalty would be an optional mechanic with different levels of difficulty or whether it be embedded in the base game. And looking at this, I would assume that loyalty is very much embedded in the base game. We're not going to be able to avoid it. Luckily, that also means that there's no levels of difficulty. However, if you look at the bottom here, you'll see there is a new tab here called Crime and Justice, and you can see it's disabled. If I go over Enable, it says this feature is not applicable right now, but coming soon. And the reason for that is Crime and Justice is planned for the next update, which I think is going to be due at the end of this year, 2021. Now, before I load the save game, I just want to say that I will be putting timestamps in for any of you who want to look at specific attributes of the new update. And that out the way, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to load my 7 Crosses series, and I'll see you on the game map. So welcome to the 7 Crosses game map. For anyone who's not following the series, this is a 1948 start that's currently reached 1972. And this is one of 2 series that I want to play through the upcoming update. Looking at the screen, you'll see that the most obvious change in this update is a complete reorganization of the graphical interface, and that's what we're going to look at first. And what I'm going to do is start with the top bar first, then do the left hand bar and then the bottom bar. And starting at the top, in fact, I just need to unpause the game because some of the active drop downs on this top bar need the game to run so that the game can collect the correct information to display. Now, because at first glance this looks like, well, a fairly useful bar, but the most useful feature is the fact that all these now have an interactive drop down. And we'll start with the dollar income. You can see that what we get here is a breakdown of our imports and exports, any vehicles we've imported, i.e. purchased, or if we got a vehicle export industry going, how much money we're making from exporting vehicles. Foreign manpower relates to if you're using the auto build mechanic in the game, because whenever you auto build a building there is always a manpower cost. And below that you see immigrant invitations. This relates to the mechanic that if you go into a building here, and up here you see it says here invite immigrants here, and then what will happen is that cost will show up there. And then at the bottom we've got tourist income, and that is also generated for dollars. You can see that I don't actually have any dollar incomes or outgoings at the moment. And what you also see is that it shows the current month and the last month. If we go back to here, you'll see that the current month is increasing, and then it also gives you the income from the previous month, which is quite useful because it gives you an idea of showing a trend. And of course, one of the advantages of these active drop downs is that you don't have to keep going to the information on this sidebar here. Now, moving across, you'll see that the next thing across is the date, and below it you've got this bar, and I think it's actually intended to map the progress of the date. Now, from my perspective, I don't think that's particularly important because I don't use the day-night cycle. But I think if you're using the day-night cycle, it gives you an indicator of when that day-night cycle is going to run. Now below we've still got the quick bar, the little chevrons allows you to open and close it. And then on the right hand side what we've got is the speed controls, that none of these have changed, and next to that we've got the weather capabilities. Of course you can flip this backwards and forwards. Moving further to the right, you'll see that we're now moving towards what I would say is probably one of the biggest quality of life improvements in the game, and that is simply the fact that we've now got a lot of key information at our fingertips without having to click into menus. So what I'm going to do is just going to open up the population statistics here so that I can relate what the information in here back to this menu here. And the first one, as you see here, is the actual population. And what this does is it gives you a breakdown of your population by workers, children and others. And you can see I've got 5,318 workers. None of them are uneducated, which is a very good sign because uneducated workers can't do many jobs. I've got 502 workers who are on lower education, and I've got 4,816 with higher education. And that profile gives you an idea of the flexibility of your workforce. Now moving down to children, the old system literally gave you 0 to 6, 7 to 21, but what they've actually done now is split that into 3 groups, which is 0 to 6, which would be the children in the kindergarten, 7 to 15, which possibly could be in the kindergarten and what you could call secondary school or college, and then you've got 18 to 21 year olds, which would be in college studying to possibly go to university. And then of course at the bottom you've got the overall key value, which is the number of over 21s who don't own a flat, which is up there. It says 279. Yeah, I suppose it does relate. And then at the bottom you've got others, which is 21 studying in university. I'm assuming these would be over 21s who are in halls of residence. And then below that you've got prisoners, which won't be active until the later update drops. And then of course if I had a tourist industry, it would tell me how many tourists are in my economy. Now moving over to the next one, it says something that says 14% here, and what that seems to relate to is the level of unemployment. Before all we had was an employment figure. You can see it on the left hand side there, 729. But what we've got here is an actual percentage of the number of people unemployed, and more importantly you get a breakdown of what is causing that unemployment. So you can see I've got no employment due to low education. I've got 113 workers who are looking after a small child. That is an indicator that I've got a possible problem with the kindergarten. And then of course we've got the 618 workers who are completely unemployed, and more interestingly we've got one person who cannot work due to sickness. So what that figure does is tell you how many people in your economy who are actually sick. And if that number starts to build up quite quickly, that's an indicator that something is going wrong, either that there's pollution, or there's an epidemic due to a global event, or simply that you're not providing enough medical care. So I think that is going to be very significant with being able to keep an overview of your economy. And it says that below, children who cannot study, elementary school, university. So based on that, I can tell that my elementary school is good. I've got 81 students who can't go to university, but to be honest, that's a figure that isn't essential because you don't need everyone to be highly educated. And of course at the bottom there we've got prisoners not working, which again would relate to the next update. So now we're going to move across to health, and you can see the health is 89%, where before we had to guesstimate what percentages were related to health. Now we actually get a fairly comprehensive breakdown of health and what's actually having an effect. You can see that the population is 99% sated, which means they've got plenty of food. In addition, they got 90% satisfaction with sports equipment, which is good. Now on the right hand side you see alcohol addiction. Now high alcohol addiction percentage with respect to health is not good news, because alcohol addiction decreases health. So when you look at this, don't assume that because you've got a high percentage that's good for health. You need to understand what these values are for. And then moving down, I've got 2% pollution, no radioactivity because I haven't built any nuclear power stations. We've got the average lifespan, which is 82.8, which correlates, it's 82.78. So obviously there's a rounding up going on there. And quite interesting, it says there's one person who can't visit a doctor, which in some ways is correlating the information here, because I've got one person who's sick like that. So we've got two now. So I just wonder if that's changed. So this is, again, something that's very useful when you're trying to get a feeling for what's going on in your economy. Now, moving over to the right, this is probably one of the most important breakdowns, because happiness makes and breaks your economy. Your happiness drops low, you get loads and loads of people escaping, and effectively your population can collapse. But with the old system, there was very little here that ever told you about what was causing the fall in happiness. Now you've got a way you can constantly keep an eye on your happiness and what factors are possibly going to cause a problem. Now, the one thing I will say about this is that it doesn't include satiety. And to be honest, food is the one indicator I would have expected to see here, because when a population doesn't have food, the happiness crashes, and then the population crashes completely because they either die or escape. So I think that's a bit of an oversight on behalf of the devs. But you can also see in here you've got clothing quality, which is a second biggest factor in keeping your population happy. Sport and culture are pretty significant, but you can rub by without them. Moving over to the right hand side, we've got no televisions, we've got no religion because I've got no churches, we've got no alcohol addiction because I run a dry economy. One thing you need to remember is that alcohol will increase happiness. From my perspective, the damage alcohol does to sickness does not outweigh the benefits of happiness, but that has to come with a caveat that may be changing in this update, because the devs are always altering these settings between updates, so it's something that we'll probably have to keep an eye on going forward. Now we come to government loyalty. Now I want to talk about two things for the government loyalty. First, I'll talk about the effect of government loyalty on happiness, and I've gone back to a community report. And what the devs actually say is that when the government loyalty drops below 30%, happiness will fall because the population are unhappy with your political culture. So from the perspective of this drop down, we got a 42% loyalty, and that means that at the moment loyalty is not having any effect on happiness. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, the fact that I've got a government loyalty of 42%, is that I checked this playthrough before I switched to the new update, and my government loyalty, because I'm playing on the stable branch, was 2%. But looking at this means that if you're going to have a continued playthrough, you're going to get an automatic 42% loyalty added to your game when you load it for the first time, because that 42% is the percentage you get when you start a new game. And I'll be honest, I'm really happy that the devs have done that, because I had a thought that when I loaded this in, that would be 0, and I'd be trying to build a loyalty from 0. So from the perspective of an ongoing series, that is a very good point. So that completes the top bar. Now, before we look at the left-hand bar, I just want to mention a little bit about the fact the messages have been moved from the bottom left to the top right. Again, I think this is quite a good quality of life improvement, because one of the problems I've always had with the messages being down in the bottom left-hand corner is that it's not an area of the screen you naturally look at. So I quite often missed key messages like global events and fires, and I think having it up here now, it's in my eye line, and I can say from playing this update for about an hour, that does make a big difference, because you now see these global events as and when they appear. So moving over to the left hand side, what you'll see the devs have done here is they've gathered up all the other features that were kind of scattered around the interface. Of course, the top one is the normal game management settings. Resource status is the overview of your resources, and one thing I do like about having the menu on this side is the font is actually a bit bigger than it was before, although this one wasn't always a problem. And of course, we've looked at the population stats, that hasn't changed, and the economy and trade is now over here. I've had a look through, and as far as I can see, none of this has changed. Now, if we go to list of vehicles and buildings, this is a subtle change, which I don't think the devs intended, but from the perspective of making YouTube videos, one of the issues I've had is that The font has been very small, which has made it difficult for me to read, and I'm pretty sure people watching the videos have probably looked at when I've opened this up and said, what on earth is he looking at? Well, what the effect is now, by having it on this left hand side, the font is a lot bigger and a lot easier to read, and that also applies to lists of lines. And I'm going to be completely honest, one of the reasons why I've never really liked the list of road lines is simply because of the small font. I've always just find it quite difficult to actually read all the individual bus lines on here. So now getting that set up and ready to go makes a very, very big difference. The next one down is the overlays. These were the ones that used to be up on the top right hand corner. These haven't changed as far as I can tell either. And moving down, you can see that the construction assign office tool is now here, and to me I think that's in a far better place than it was before, because in the past you had to open a menu to get to it to change it. Now it's one click, go in there, and you can actually set up your quick selections, and away you go. So moving down now to workshop buildings and the mods, there's one change here which is going to be very useful. It says here display in bottom menu, you say none, favorites and everything, and we'll go into a bit more depth there later on. Now the other thing I want to show you is there's two new tabs added in here. One is secret police, because I've subscribed to this local intelligence office, and this is a mod that's been created by White K3T. As far as I know, this is the first secret police mod on the workshop. Now the reason I've subscribed to it is the fact that on my current playthrough I don't have a lot of space to put down the vanilla building, so I subscribe to that. The other one is Orphanage here. What Nova's done is added a Tudor orphanage. Now as far as I can tell, this has been added to one of his existing mods, and I can't tell you offhand what that one actually is, but what I will say is if you look at the bottom, you can see it's got a warehouse for food, clothes and meat, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that going forward. Now the editor tool, well that's the editor tool. Down here we've got scripts. Now this is something that really interests me, because I'm really looking forward to this being implemented, and so that we're going to be able to create scenarios, and I've already started working up ideas for scenarios. It's also going to be interesting is the fact that this is going to be the vehicle that's going to add the cosmonaut challenge to the vanilla game. Below that we've got the time-lapse camera and the general help questions and answers option. Now we're going to start looking at the bottom construction menu. This is probably where most of the activity is going to be. It's also probably going to be the most difficult part of the GUI changes to get used to. And I apologise in advance for the smallness of the icons. I have pushed up the GUI scale to maximum, but this is the biggest these icons are. But what I will say is that after playing for about an hour, even though they're small, eventually you start to get used to where they are, and you can also see that they're actually grouped by colour, and the grey colour is general transportation, the brownish colour is cargo and storage, red is energy, citizens is green, and industry is this amber yellow colour. What I will say about this menu system is it is a kind of active menu system, in the sense you click here. Now one thing that does annoy me a little bit is that you get this thing turn up when you open it, and what this does is if you come across here, it's disappeared. I'm hoping the devs might do something a little bit about this, but what this does do is allow you to actually set whether you're going to auto build in rubles, dollars, or just build from constructions. It also allows you to batch build here according to what you want to do. It says batch start construction, suspend construction. There's also this tab here which allows you to turn on the wireframe, topographics, underground and snap. To me this just feels a little bit messy, and as you can see, because we've clicked on roads here, you can see it's back again. I think it's when you've got this menu open and when you click over here, but it doesn't seem to be consistent. As you can see here is when you put your cursor over road, you now get all the road building options here. But one nice thing is that, say for example you're building lots of gravel roads, so what this does is it means that you only got one click to get back to what you were doing before. So if you're building multiple gravel roads in sessions, you don't have to use 2 clicks. And that also applies to bridges. In fact, it applies all across the board. And you can see that this menu is now split up into sections. You've got roads here. The only thing I will say is about cancel roads. And I think what I'm going to need to do is rework my hotbar at the top here, so I don't have to keep coming in here to cancel roads and things like that. If I come across to depots, what you'll see now is that we've now got mods appearing, and this is one of my favorite mods. If I go back to mods here and change this to everything, just cancel that. We come into depots here. Well, if I haven't got there, and we've got maintenance here, which I think we've only got technical services. This is probably not a good example, but if I had all my mods, this would show it straight away. So you can see we've got depots, we've got technical services. Now, technical services is an example of an option that will appear multiple times in this menu system, and this is one thing that may cause a bit of confusion to take a little getting used to. Another thing I'd also like is the fact they've now split bus stops and bus platforms. So, and then of course what you got over here is cargo options. You've got refueling here with all the appropriate gas stations. I've got a feeling I'm going to have to rework my favorites. And then on the end here you've got the trolleybus trafo, which is the way you connect power for your trolleybus system. If I go quickly flip through here, you'll see that rail, pedestrians, ships, airplanes and cableways all have their own separate groupings. Again, what you actually get here is the loading for and unloading for the aggregate there. We move on to cargo now. What you'll see is that it's now grouped according to forklifts distributions. And again, you see small distribution offices appear in here. And quite interestingly, you also get a separate section now for container loading facilities. This is, I must admit, this is one option that I'd quite often get lost in the old menu system. And we got here road cargo stations, cargo train stations, all the way through here. Again, you can see there's a little bit of duplication turning in. A lot of the duplication relates to storage. So we've got open store, warehouse, space for vehicles and containers. That's another one I always used to have a bit of a problem for. Refrigeration, and more importantly, out here now we've actually got grain silos. Of course, we get the same with the conveyor belt system, liquids, dry bulk. Electricity is very much the same, but grouped together in a different way. And of course, we've got the options for power stations in here, and of course, we've got heating. Now we're going to move on to a fairly interesting section, which is the residential areas. Now, one of the nice quality of life changes here is the fact that residences are now grouped into 3 sizes, and based on the mods that I've got, as far as I can tell, is small residents are 0 to 50, medium residents are 50 to 100, and anything over 100 is classified as large. Now, moving across, they've also split the grocery stores from the shopping centres. So what you've got here is a nice way of identifying what types things are. They've also interestingly added restaurants to food and shopping from tourism, and what you'll see going forward now is that some of the elements of tourism have now been blended into this menu system. And you can see here, so we've got alcohol here as well, cinemas, and we've now got gallery of art. Now, one thing I did notice when I played my Divided series was that local residents would attend tourist attractions for culture, but I was never too sure how much benefit to culture they actually gave. So obviously what the devs are looking to do is integrate some of the tourist attractions into the main economy. Got television station, radio station. Interestingly, again, they split the sport into outside and inside, which again is quite useful because I could never find the indoor swimming pool. Now we're going to move on to state infrastructure, and of course we've got emergency, schools, universities, and then of course we've got 3 grey icons here because these are obviously placeholders for the crime and punishment update, or crime and justice is the way they're describing it. And of course on the end here we've got secret police, which we'll be talking a little bit more later on when we start talking about loyalty. And then down the end here we've got maintenance, which is City Hall. And what you can see here is technical services is back, and quite usefully the pollution monitor is on the end here, because again I could never remember where the pollution monitor was. Now I know it's going to be in state infrastructure. We've also got tourism here, which is hotels and attractions, and again what you'll see here is there's some duplication with the residential areas. And of course down here we've got trees and accessories. I'm just going to show you very quickly the monuments, because one of the new features of this update is the fact that monuments add loyalty, but be aware that monuments will not increase loyalty greater than 50%, but what they do have is an area factor. You can see there it says plus 2.8% loyalty for 145 meters, and I think the bigger the one it is, 94 415, so a red star monument is going there. One thing I haven't been able to confirm, in fact I'm just going to build a monument here just to show you, is the fact that if we build a monument in here, we'll just put it there, and we're just going to cancel out of that. I'm just going to auto build this because I'm going to throw this away eventually. I'm just going to build this. What you'll see is the monument doesn't have any stats related to loyalty improvement, so that poses the question of whether this monument which I built previously will be improving loyalty, but that's something that we'll probably need to investigate in the long term. Moving on to the industry section, I think this is one section that's probably going to take me personally quite some time and may prove a little bit frustrating when this update first drops, because it's split into what you could call food, alcohol and crops, which is probably one relatively straightforward because that it effectively mirrors what we used to get in the old menu system. But then after that, things start to get a little bit complicated because you've got miscellaneous here. And what you see is the wood cutting post appears here, and you actually get mods added here as like the carpenter's wood shop, and we've also got clothes, and now we get gravel, which is the gravel quarry and the gravel processing unit, which has been moved away from where you would expect it. Then we got the cement plant, concrete plant, prefab panels, which is to do with construction. Now if I move on to fossil fuels, this now groups the oil refinery into there, the coal mine and the coal ore processing plant. And then we've got chemicals here, and now we're getting into the duplication of storage, because we've got oil storage, a small aggregate store crops up in here because I think it's related to the coal mine and the warehouse. Now if we move on to here, the iron mine is now in this section alongside steel and the steel mill. Oh, there's the iron ore processing unit. I thought that was missing. And we got aluminium, and of course we got the storage here. So again, we got small aggregate storage here, large aggregate storage in here as well. So again, the storage is duplicated. Now if we move on to, we're in metallurgy now, isn't it? Now we're into advanced industry, and we've got nuclear electronics engineering. And one thing I do like is the fact that you now can see the different production line systems in here as well. And then on the end we've actually got the construction industry here, and you can see we've got construction offices, and what we get now is a duplication again from the previous menu for the construction items, the gravel, the quarry and wood cutting here. Now what I will show you is if we come to here and we go to mine, you can see that in the mod section these are grouped together. But if I add the coal mine onto there as the mod, so if we go back to fossil fuels, and one quick tip guys is if you press the control key now, you can get rid of these annoying menus. What you see is we get the small coal mine in there, and as I previously said, I think it's going to be this construction menu that probably could prove the most frustrating when you first start using this interface. But I think once you're familiar with it and set up your own preferences of where you want to go, I think life will be a lot more easier. That completes an overview of the changes to the graphical interface. What we're going to do now is take a look at the new loyalty mechanic. What I first want to do is check. So my loyalty has dropped to 41%, and I think the best place to start is just go through the buildings and show the way loyalty actually affects the individual buildings. And what you see here is there's now a new section across the top of this building that we'll come back to this later on. But what you will find is that now the loyalty inside of a building is now hidden, and you can't see that loyalty until you've built a secret service office. But also if you come across to, gotta find a school. What you'll find is that's not a school, this is a school. What you'll find now is there's a setting in here which allows you to specify the loyalty of the teachers and staff working with the children. And the reason for this is that education is probably going to be the best way to improve your overall loyalty as it goes forward, because if you set this to say, well, we've got 41%, so if I set this to say 35%, that means that the students leaving here will have a minimum of 35% loyalty. But be aware, it says here, if workers' loyalty is unknown, anyone is allowed to work. So until you get your secret police in, anyone can stroll in here and teach your students. But at the same time, if you come over to here, if we actually knew what the loyalty of these teachers were, they would still pass on their loyalty. That also applies to universities as well. We've got universities here, and what you can do here is actually set the minimum loyalty of the government employees, also the minimum loyalty of students who want to attend. So what that means is that you can continue to improve the overall loyalty. Looks like this university is a little bit overloaded. This is probably the reason why I'm getting some kind of low educated workers in here as well. So the question now is, how do you actually improve loyalty? Well, I've already touched on it by building statues. Now what you need to remember is that statues can only improve loyalty to 50%, but the first thing you're really going to need to do is actually find what the loyalty is in your area, because until you know what the loyalty is, you're effectively wasting your time. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to build a secret police office, but I'm going to use the mod because I don't really have the space in here for the full-sized security office building, because it's a little bit big. So what I'm going to do is just build this, and I'm going to auto build this as well. So I'm just going to build this. And then another reason why I'm using the smaller building is that I don't really have the money to build the larger buildings. But if you're interested, if we come to here, and just to give you an idea of the it's not that, it's this one. This is a fairly chunky building like universities are. I think it's going to be a bit of a problem if you're going to try and put this into an existing playthrough, and it could be a bit of a challenge when you first start out. So I'm really hoping that the modders will come up with more buildings. Now I'm just going to give you a quick look in at this building here, and what you see here is that there's actually an umbrella on this building, and I quite like that because I got this view of the Secret Service sat up here on their umbrella and watching the people walking around and looking for any suspicious activity. Or maybe that's just me. Now, in order to activate this building, you can see the security you can set a minimum loyalty in here as well. Although, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the benefits of this is, because they're not educating anything. But of course, what we are going to need is some vehicles, and what we're going to do is buy the standard security vehicles. We're going to buy about 3 of those. Now, I'm just going to pause the game very briefly, because what I want to show you is that at the moment these are not exposed. So we're just going to unpause again, and we're going to wait for our guys to kind of speed up a little bit. I think it takes a little while. There we are. So he's now leaving the building, and what I want to do is just follow him around a little bit, because oops, he's going that way. And you'll find that they will drive down the footpaths, because where is he going? Oh, he's going in here. And what you'll see is as soon as the car visits the building, you can now see the loyalty in the building, but more importantly, you can also see the loyalty of the residents in here as well, or the workers in here as well. So you can see, like, let's just pause, and you can see here you've got Etusha here has a loyalty of 56%. So again, this is something that's very important. When this shows this loyalty, this is an average loyalty, not a specific one. So you can have people with higher and lower loyalties, and that's the reason why you need to set these values on here, because as those cars go out and cover more and more areas, these mechanics will start to kick in. But just to finish off the secret police, I'm just going to show you that, like fire stations, the secret police have an area of coverage which their vehicles will work in. Also, I'm assuming that eventually this will improve over time, and you can see here now, right, so we actually got someone in here who's got 28% loyalty. We've got some people who haven't been visited yet. I think what will probably happen is that, because I've set this at 40%, the people will need to complete their shifts before they can work in here. Actually, it just occurred to me that if you set this, I'm wondering whether that may have a slight area effect when the security police turn up, and may improve the loyalty in the building. Now, the other ways you can improve loyalty is by building radio stations, because if you build a radio station, you can set it to spread propaganda. That will improve loyalty. And another method, which is probably more for the mid to late game, is that once you start building personal vehicles, what you can do is set a condition on your car dealers that only people with certain loyalty can purchase this. So that would be effectively a reward for loyalty to the party. I think that covers all I know about loyalty. There's obviously some more depth in there which we're going to need to explore. Now the next thing I want to do is look at orphanages, and just to show you, the orphanage is quite a big chunky building again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to Nova's mod for an orphanage and see if we can slide that in somewhere here. Can I get it in about here? Yeah, we can just slip that in here. Again, I'm just going to auto build it. Now while it's building, I'm just explain what the role of orphanages is. Now prior to this update, there's a mechanic that if parents die or escape, they take their children with them. What the orphanage does is provide a place so that any children from parents who die or escape can be taken into the orphanage. And what that actually does is that if you set this parameter here for government loyalty, the teachers coming in here will pass that loyalty on to the children. So in some ways, an orphanage is a way of accelerating the loyalty of the new generation coming through. Now the one thing I don't understand is whether these children will actually attend school, especially the older children. It says 17 there. I suppose the only way we're going to find out, well, it says it's actually in school time, but I don't know where they actually are. Oh, no, they're actually in here. So it looks very much like the orphanage actually acts as a school, but what that will do is increase their loyalty. So they're currently at orphanage, and they're now in 3 times. So are they going anywhere else? I'm assuming that they will also go out and do sport and culture and other things. It's also interesting here, if you look in this close-up picture here, something I haven't noticed before. They've already put the icon in for whether someone has got an inclination towards crime. Now, one thing I have noticed about this orphanage is the fact that it's got storage for food, clothes and meat. Now, I'm not sure whether the children here have to be fed here, or whether they will go to, say, a shop to get their food and clothes and items, because if you've got to start delivering food and clothes to an orphanage, it could get a bit tricky. There's also the possibility whether adults would come in here and do the shopping as well. It looks very much, even though they're actually in the orphanage, they will still participate in that's going there. Actually, let's just see where the baby is. They're actually in the orphanage, so in some ways the orphanage could also possibly act as a kindergarten. That's something that's going to need to be investigated in more depth. Now, right down the bottom, this intended upbringing is similar to the radio stations, and I'm not exactly too sure how this will work, because I can't understand. So like Soviet propaganda, that kind of seems to improve that, but they mainly get their loyalty from there. Someone's wandering off here. Have I got a tail on someone? Okay, we've got a tail on him. Therefore, I think this is something that's going to have to be played with over time. I think I've got to a point now where I've covered most of the main features. What we're going to do now is go into some of the other features that will have a significant impact on the overall gameplay. And probably the next one here is the change that will allow over 21s to move to any spare accommodation on the map. And just to come here, you can see I've got 240 over 21s, and this comes down to the feature you might have spotted here before. It says allow citizens to move into this building, and what you can do is now specify what types of citizens you want to move in. So say for example you build an accommodation block next to a university and you want highly educated people, what you do is you just uncheck this. It also allows you to create areas where you could have your real party loyalists be, and again this would be something you'd want to do in say with respect to schools and secret police. You want these people to live close to the buildings that they're going to use to, and you can see these stars here represent an increase in loyalty. To put that back the way it is, not that it makes that much difference. What you can see here is that you can now set this for buildings that are being constructed, and this is going to be very important, because if you've got an area here which is a new town being laid out, you don't want people to move in because it could actually cause a bit of a problem. So what you can do is you can turn this off, and that's the reason why no one's in. If I turn this on now and we let the game play, what you'll see is everyone starts to move in because they're now moving across the map. And of course, not all the facilities are going to be here, so they're going to get fairly unhappy pretty quickly. And you can see the temperature's too low as well, and we're in April, so they're going to be affected by the temperature. They've got no heating because it hasn't been installed here as well. So this is going to be quite an important mechanic to keep control of. I'm just wondering if I turn that off, whether the people will stop moving in. You can see people are getting sick already, so that's going to be reflected up here. In fact, it'd be quite interesting to see whether that comes through. The ability to control the population works at a higher level as well. If I click on Foodville here, what you'll see is that you've now got this overview here because it's in charge of the settlement. So what you can do, if you're laying out a whole brand new city, what you can do is actually turn this off to say I want nobody moving into here at all until I'm ready for people to move into. Now, one thing I have noticed, and I'm not sure if this is a bug, if you click on a city area that's not related to a city and that's not got any buildings, you will not have the option to switch on residents. So, for example, if you come out to here, you can't, not here, sorry, I come right over to here, what you'll find is that you can't switch this on until you've got at least, I think, at least one building that has been complete. So again, that's something you probably need to consider when you're laying out a new town. What probably the best thing to do would be like to build the shop or the bus station first. So that's probably something you do need to consider when you're actually expanding your city, and something to watch over, because what you'll probably find is that we're going to get a lot of people getting very unhappy here now. In fact, that's gone right up to 231. So despite the fact that I turned that off, you can see that the happiness will start to fall as they got there, because they're complaining about everything. So I think that covers everything to do with over 21s moving out. Of course, there is an extension as well, in the sense that if you build halls of residence next to a university, over 21s will also move into the halls of residence as well. Next thing I'm going to talk about is tourism. Now, I don't actually have any tourist buildings here. What they've done is they've really nerfed tourism, and a impression I get is that if you build tourist buildings without manufacturing the food and clothes, you may not make a profit anymore. So therefore, in order to make profit from tourism, you've got to have a self-sufficient supply of food, clothes and alcohol, which I think is a very good mechanic, because it stops that early game exploit, but also balances tourism out. I'd also guess that tourism is going to be one of these areas that's going to be constantly tinkered with over time. So building an economy on tourism could be a little bit tricky going forward. Now, I just want to emphasize something else, which I've already alluded to, but I want to demonstrate it a bit more clearly. That is that, say, for example, I would choose a random building. And one of the big bugbears that's been around since the game started is this information tab. When you're trying to build a building, you press control, it now goes off. So now what you can do is actually place buildings without that annoying tag floating up. And while we're talking about buildings, if I can find one that will probably demonstrate this quite dramatically, what I'm looking for, Prefab Factory might be doing, is that they've now introduced mirroring. So if you press T, what you'll find is the building will flip right round. So it's not the same as rotation, because if you rotate, you're effectively moving it like this. See, so what you've got is the two tabs at the top, but if you do this and then press T, what you see is the two tabs appear at the bottom. So this is going to solve a lot of problems with respect to placing buildings, and of course you can get rid of that annoying tab there. And for anyone who's following the series, now that's available, this whole area is going to be completely redesigned. So that's mirroring done. Now, another change is to construction offices, and the way that the vehicles in construction offices now go and get materials. Because one of the annoying factors that has been going on for some time in this series is that because I've got very limited production in my steel mill here, you get multiple construction offices sending trucks up here to pick up steel. And what the new change does is it means that the construction office won't send all the trucks just because there's a little bit of steel. They will still send trucks out to collect steel. In fact, you can see here we've got 0.96 tons. They now will wait to there's enough resources available. So what it actually means is you're going to have less wasted journeys of trucks coming up to here, picking up absolutely nothing and then leaving again. So that will improve the efficiency of your construction offices. But the two exceptions to that is actually producing concrete and asphalt, because the output storage for this is so small that they can't really apply to the construction offices in that perspective. So again, this is going to be a useful quality of life if it does stop all these trucks running around burning fuel. One interesting thing, if you're really into building at long range, what you can do now is have the option of come in here and find an all related vehicle. In fact, it's probably the best way to do it is to edit the line itself. What you'll find is that if you come into here, line stations now, here, and what you can find now is that when you get to a bus stop, you can actually force citizens now to transfer to another vehicle. So if you're building at very long range, so rather than doing what we've had to do up until this update, is build two bus stations, one for unloading, one to pick up now. What you can actually do now is turn this on and force the passengers to get off and then reboard another vehicle. And I think this could be very useful with respect to passenger lines that deliver to train stations, because what you can do is force the passengers off and hopefully they're going to catch a train. But I will add the caveat there that I haven't actually tested that. That's just an assumption that I'm making. And I think I've finally got to the end of this video. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it interesting. Any comments, opinions, feel free to chuck it into the comments section of the video. And for anyone who's keeping up with this series, I will emphasize that I will be returning back to the stable branch until such time as this update is released. But until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.